The idea of the holding is to make this a company that will operate under commercial company law. It's not an agency, it's not a public institution, it's a state-owned holding, but operating under commercial law, Zakon o gospodarskih družbah. What the law says actually is there will be two types of investment of this holding. One, I hope this will be limited to a few infrastructure companies, so-called strategic, which are not available for privatization. And there will be others which will be called non-strategic or portfolio, which are available for privatization. When I say available, I mean available. I don't mean under urgent need to be privatized.
Slovenia is behind neighboring countries in terms of attracting foreign direct investment. And foreign direct investment is a very important driver of knowledge. Not every country can know everything about how to do business, so it's good to take knowledge from abroad. And the question is why Slovenia has been so much behind. Maybe one of the reasons is that in Slovenia the presence of the state has remained particularly big. So we at the OECD, we are not against the presence of the state. We think that sometimes the state is managing very well companies, but it's not always the case, sadly. And in Slovenia, there are evidence that sometimes there was some kind of political influence of companies. And so by privatizing companies, you have a double benefit potentially of attracting foreign direct investment, because you can have also Slovenian investors, which is very good, but you will also have foreign investors bringing knowledge. And at the same time, you will avoid too much interference for political reasons of the government.
If you have a mixture of institutional investors, they might represent hedge funds or retirement funds, things of that sort. Individual investors, just like you or I, might be shareholders in a company that we go and buy their shares, but then also other companies investing as well. You can generate a better mix than if you go only towards fully diffused model where there's no concentrated group of shareholders. What happened is that just empowers the managers. Then the managers act in their interest and suck the value out of the company at the expense of the investors.
The main motivation is simply to get responsible owners to the companies which in most of the countries are private. Telecoms, petrol retailers, banks, insurance companies. I don't think that private owners would just let the companies go bankrupt. It's the other way around, because they will be owned by them, they will take their best care to manage them, and they will bring fresh capital in order to develop the companies. They will not buy it in order to let them decay and go bankrupt and so on. They will buy them because they will see some upward potential in the companies.
So I would like to take an opportunity, of course, to have a question to all the respected guests. I would like to focus just on the privatization process. So maybe also the fears that were expressed for the audience about the privatization might be solved. And I would like to have your opinion about the involvement of all the citizens and also individual shareholders when the state shares that are in most important companies, still majority state-owned, would be able for sale, not just to, at least in the first circle, to maybe institutional investors or strategic partners, but maybe in the first circle to the citizens or to individual investors. And of course it could go well, maybe also with pension reform, with some tax discounts that might stimulate the capital of also the citizens, especially regarding their feelings about first privatization in 1993 and what followed. So I would like to stop at this point, maybe just to add that we in our association don't see a need for state to stay 25+% in banks, like was mentioned from the minister before, because it would be enough, just maybe really for one reason, not to change the seat of the company to other country or something like that. It's enough to have a golden share or whatever. So the major stake might be offered for sale. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Verbic.
I think I would be in favor of that, of course. It's not always possible. I mean, if you have a direct sale, then It's not possible, but in a lot of cases when you have more time, it is possible. And I would certainly like to see, I will probably find a way to require that the holding, once it is established, has the obligation to try to float most of the state-owned companies on the stock exchange as well. That would be one way to increase interest for the capital market in Slovenia. I think that can be done. We've done it. I mean, the country has done it with, for example, Telecom, Triglav as well. NKBM has, made an IPO even, I think, in Warsaw. They also have in their recap strategy, they have issuing of new shares to private individuals. They were just of the opinion that at this time they would not get a very good price or very large interest. But we have supported putting that in their privatization, recapitalization plan. So I'm generally in favor of what you propose.
Mr. Beynet?
Well, I think it's a good idea also to sell shares to the wider public, but you have also to be careful that first you need a strategic investor. I mean, you can only be part of the share because you need somebody with knowledge. And also you should be careful also that citizens don't get too much disappointed, because sometimes they expect a lot of profit and benefit. If you think, for example, a Eurotunnel that was widely distributed to a citizen and the share lost almost all value, and people who bought Eurotunnel shares lost their money, and same with other companies. So of course, there's a risk to take, but the consequence that it could have that people get maybe disappointed and don't want later to invest in companies which not what you want. So the price has to be well established.
Dr. Palmer?
There's also one danger to think about if you have a very diffuse share ownership model where it's just offered to all the citizens. It has the benefit, it generates widespread public support, but it means that if the shareholder interest is so diffuse, it gives existing management of the company disproportionate power. And that's one of the reasons why foreign direct investment, if you say have a 10% ownership claim, you have a management interest that really are interested in the company and are able and willing to fire the managers if they're looting the firm or misusing the assets. And having a too diffuse model of ownership means you're giving the power to the managers, and we know what they're going to do then. They're going to effectively manage the company in their interest rather than the investors or the shareholders. So that's why I think there needs to be a serious balance here and look at large institutional investors as well who can exercise management or control over management.
How it looks, I mean, the state holding from the aspects of OECD, since also the establishing of agency, EUKINI, for managing the state ownership was on some side an excuse sometimes that it was like what OECD wanted to implement, but in some cases it was quite obvious that the role of this agency was not really very efficient, and also not in every case a very positive one.
Well, I think the OECD was broadly happy with this agency. I mean, what mainly the big difference between this agency and what happens in other countries within the OECD is that the agency was dependent on the parliament. In one way, it's good because the parliament could consider it independent also, so it makes sure that the agency is relatively independent, but the parliament doesn't have the knowledge on how to deal with these assets. So what you need is to have something a bit more in between, when you have like ministry that have more the knowledge of how to manage these assets, being involved, using a clear defined codes of management, because you need a codes and rules to be transparent, and so that you have accountability on what they will be doing. At the same time, you can also have the parliament having a look, so it's like kind of a check and balances. It's also something, one of the limitations still of the previous and the new one is the way to nominate people at the board of the agency, also at the board of the companies. It's not that what has been done is bad, but I think there are some still points that could be improved to make sure that there will be no political interference, and that people will be chosen only on their knowledge on the business.
There are a lot of cases where just someone who owns one share gets up and asks that difficult question and puts the management on the spot. What are you doing with my money? Because the investors are the owners of the company. They're the ones who are employing the managers. But managers like to think they're the bosses and treat the investors as the little people. And that needs to be turned around. A enterprise-oriented culture should be focused on adding value to the company, adding value for shareholders, and then everyone gets value. Employees, customers, suppliers, and so on get value from that. But the legal responsibility of management is to be answerable to the owners, to the shareholders of the company. When that is broken, and management thinks they can do whatever they want, then they act in their own interest and effectively loot the company.
When can we expect the very exact proposals like we each year in the report of OECD receive here? It will be, I suppose, also one of the major topics in the report for the year.
Actually, it was a major topic of the last survey, so we have a chapter on governance and foreign direct investment. This time we will focus on issues that are partly correlated, because we have a chapter on how to make public saving. So, I mean, privatization is not a public saving per se, but this is one of the way at least to reduce debt. And but also we have a chapter on bank, because Slovenia has difficulties in the banking sectors, and you have big public banks. So the question of privatization is also a key issue for the banking sector. So we will not deal with the topics in general, but we will apply it to some specific and important cases in Slovenia. We also discuss a bit the new law on Slovenian sovereign holdings company, and how to make sure that this company is designed in a way that the OECD thinks is the best in terms of international comparison, for the transparency, avoiding government interference, making sure that the strategic assets are well designed so that the government doesn't keep assets that are not in fact strategic, and that public participation remains limited to where the state is most needed, but wherever the market would work better is going to the market and the private holders.
There are things that we should learn from success stories and failure stories around the world, and see what works and what doesn't. And a few things to keep in mind. Number one, I think this is a good time for Slovenia to move very boldly more towards rule of law and towards open market economy, not cronyism and special inside deals, which has characterized much of the region, but real open free market economy. And it should be done quickly. Quickly is much better. If you postpone it, it never happens. That's one thing that we have learned. Another thing is to give up this idea that foreign investors are bad. They're just the same as domestic investors. Sometimes they can bring new ideas. And often, because they're not tied in with the political culture, they have the advantage that they really represent the interest of all the shareholders of the company rather than those who are well connected. And to give up the idea of so-called strategic industries. Every place I've gone around the world, people talk about it. I don't know what it means. We heard that in France, yogurt is a strategic industry, and in Russia, it's car manufacturing, and there's no such thing as a strategic industry. There are industries that add value or they don't add value, and that's what we should focus on.
And what is your general comment on the Slovenian ability to be government as it should be, especially facing the crisis that is right here, and obviously it deepens still. So what would be your comment? And maybe if I ask you directly, are you optimistic, or you think that we should listen more to what are we told from the levels of OECD, of European Commission, and some other also international associations?
Well, frankly, I think the government, is doing its best. Now it's a very difficult time, so I think we have all to be quite humble, including international organizations, because some of us didn't see all of the crisis building up, and so I think the government is doing its best, and we'll keep advising him, of course, and especially I think in terms of consolidation, fiscal consolidation measures. I mean, there could definitely be some improvement, although they are doing a lot of good things. And in terms of the banking, I mean, this is an ongoing process, so we still want to see exactly what will happen with the law on the asset management company, and if this law is veto, what the government will do later, and so, and all the kind of law associated to it. So it's not the end of the story. I mean, even if there is a law to deal with the bad assets, we have to see in practice how it's done. And so it's a tough road. But I think the government is going in the right direction, broadly speaking. But we hope we can be helpful with our advice.
Would you be so kind to also tell about this antagonism between cronyism you mentioned and real capitalism? Obviously you are liberal economists, but still, would you be so kind to express it also to our audience?
One of the things, many people have confused privatization or market economy. They think of cronyism. Well, cronyism is a very serious problem. You have crony socialism. Everybody knew about that the party bosses and the people at the top got all the privileges and the benefits. But we also have cronyism when they're nominally private companies, when those companies have special favors or the managers have connections to the state power. The disease is cronyism. The cause is interventionism and state intervention into the market. And the cure is the free market economy. What that means is not just nominal private ownership. It means everyone approaches the market legally equal. No special rules for this company that are different from that company, no subsidies and bailouts and so on. If you add value in the economy, you make profits. If you subtract value, you make losses. Cronyism, as we've seen in a lot of countries, you have private profits and public losses. If they do a bad job, they get bailed out. That doesn't work. That's a disaster. And I think people recognize that's terrible. The problem is when they confuse that with the free market. It's not the free market at all. It's the opposite.